young entrepreneur took in a homeless teenager in his workshop. When he saw what the boy did to his business, he was astonished. Michael had always dreamed of owning his own business, where he could bring his ideas to life by creating custom designer furniture. A few years ago, he gathered enough funds and decided to open a small workshop. Initially, Michael's enthusiasm gradually gave way to anxiety and disappointment. The business, which had started off so successfully, faced a number of challenges. Michael discovered that taxes and the cost of materials were significantly eating into his budget, leaving less and less for development and innovation. High-quality wood and metal fittings, essential for creating truly premium products, were becoming more expensive every day. Additionally, suppliers began raising prices, citing the economic situation in the country. The customer base, initially seeming loyal and interested in unique furniture projects, over time became more demanding and less willing to accept the agreed price. Michael also faced stiff competition. Many wanted exclusive items, but not everyone was willing to pay for quality and a personalized approach. The market was flooded with cheaper alternatives, and each new order required more effort and persuasion. "We saw a wonderful cherry wood cabinet on your website," a stranger on the other end of the line started off, "but it's too expensive for us." The price is set considering the cost of manual labor. "Cheaper products come off the assembly line," Michael said, disappointed, fully understanding how this conversation would end. "We offer discounts for pensioners and large families, but no more." "Manual labor? Not from an assembly line? It seems to me you're being too pretentious. I saw almost the same cabinet on another site. And that's why you called me, to immediately inform me about the appearance of mass-market products that resemble branded ones? What news? That's never happened before." "Rude." And the line went dead. Michael wasn't even upset anymore. A bitter habit had set in. It felt like it had always been and would always be this way. But deep down, there was still a hope that the situation could be changed. Every day, Michael thought more and more about changing his approach. He started attending business training sessions, looking for ways to reduce costs without compromising quality, and considering transitioning to more mass-produced, yet still unique, furniture models to attract a wider audience. Every evening, alone in his small office surrounded by drawings and catalogs, Michael repeatedly pondered possible strategies to break out of the deadlock. Although nearing 30, Michael still retained the fire of youth and an insatiable desire to prove to the world his ability to revolutionize the furniture business. He opened his workshop with great hopes and ambitions, dreaming of creating furniture that would not just be pieces of interior, but works of art capable of conveying the emotions and character of its owner. Michael's workshop occupied a small space in an old industrial area of the city, where every square meter was precious. The facility was equipped with everything necessary for work: machines, tools, storage spaces for wood and other materials. Despite this, the workshop had not yet reached a level of development to become widely known and bring in a stable income. Michael's team consisted of just a few people. These were old acquaintances and like-minded individuals who, like him, believed in the possibility of creating unique and in-demand products. However, some were simply willing to take any job. Michael paid generously and even hired those who had nowhere else to go. For example, Morley, a 50-year-old former convict. Morley was sent to prison for causing grievous bodily harm with a weapon and robbery. It was an old story that ruined his life. Youthful mistakes, as usual, hurt the heart more deeply in maturity. Now, Morley was sincerely grateful to Michael's father for not abandoning his childhood friend in trouble. "How's your father, Mike?" asked the furniture maker in his smoky, hoarse voice. "My wife and I have an anniversary coming up. We wanted to invite him over. Of course, it's not a luxurious businessman-style vacation, but a cozy evening in the gazebo with a barbecue never hurt anyone." The young man leaned against the workbench and smiled. Sometimes he felt incredibly sorry for this man. He wasn't inherently bad, he had just been too young once and messed up big time, for which he paid with a long prison term and a ruined career. "Your gazebo looks better than some restaurants, Doc." Michael waved his hand. I think my father won't refuse to visit an old friend. Say hello to Aunt Molly from all of us. We miss her plum pie. There were many such deprived people in the workshop. Talented individuals with golden hands who, at some point, found themselves on the sidelines of life. But in the workshop, they were in their element. They had the patience during months when orders were scarce and there was nothing to pay wages with. This was yet another factor driving Michael to quickly pull the business out of this slump. Problems began at the stage of purchasing materials. The high cost of quality wood and hardware significantly limited the possibilities for creativity. Additionally, the tax burden made the financial situation even more tense. Michael was constantly looking for ways to cut costs without compromising on quality, but it was not as simple as it initially seemed. Clients who came to the workshop often expected incredible quality and uniqueness at mass production prices, putting Michael in a difficult position. On one hand, he aimed to please the clients and secure the much-needed orders. On the other, each project required time, money, and effort, sometimes exceeding the initial budget. Michael's youth and energy fueled his ambitions, but also added impatience. He wanted to quickly achieve success and make the business grow and develop, but reality kept reminding him of its presence, presenting new obstacles for the young businessman. In moments of doubt, Michael questioned whether his expectations were too high and if his youthful idealism hindered an objective view of the situation. Michael understood that stagnation was not an option for his business. The furniture market was constantly changing, and to remain competitive, it was necessary to keep up with the times, often requiring investments and expansion. However, his current financial situation left much to be desired, and the prospect of taking out a large loan at a high interest rate seemed too risky. Weighing all the pros and cons, Michael realized that the decision to expand required not only additional funds, but also a significant increase in production volumes, which entailed new challenges in management and logistics. He questioned whether he was ready for these changes and whether he could handle the potential consequences. On the other hand, staying at the current level risked missing the opportunity to improve his financial performance and reputation in the eyes of clients and competitors. He also considered his craftsmen. Would they agree to work more for the same pay? And with the increase in production volume, they would have to put in more effort. It would be very unfair to subject people who trusted him to the risk of severe fatigue. Furthermore, it was very important for Michael to earn the respect of his father, a successful businessman who always believed that business should bring not only satisfaction but also a stable income. Any failure would seriously affect Michael's relationship with his father. They had once had a serious quarrel over the business. George was against his son's idea of opening a workshop. He was a man of stern character, not accepting creative activities as a way to earn money. But Michael was as stubborn as his father. We have worked in heavy industry all our lives. Factories need machines, they will always be bought. The man slammed a glass of whiskey on the table. And furniture? Open a factory, an ordinary furniture factory like the Swedes did. What kind of manufactory? Designer furniture also sells well. Michael jumped up from the table. Rich people want their homes to look luxurious. George rubbed his nose. He genuinely didn't understand why his son insisted on going against him. He could have given his child the means to open an entire furniture factory, but he wanted to focus on originality and being unlike anyone else. Deal with your childish fantasy yourself. I'll give you money only for the premises and the machines. The man pursed his lips and began to speak through his teeth. But if you come crawling for handouts, let me disappoint you, there will be none. Decided to play designer? Go ahead. Now get out. I've got to spend the whole day in this office in a bad mood. Since then, he and his father rarely talked about business. George watched what was happening, mentally amazed that his son had not yet gone bankrupt. Of course, that day he was too harsh when he said he would not help his son. If everything went downhill, he would certainly help his little designer. But Michael himself didn't need to know that. Michael often found himself thinking that his decision, whatever it might be, would significantly impact not only the business but also family relationships. This added extra pressure and made him be especially careful with every step. At this stage of his life, faced with financial constraints and personal doubts, Michael sought ways to minimize risks while also striving to find a strategy that would take his business to the next level. He understood that a difficult choice lay ahead, requiring not only business acumen but also personal wisdom. Michael faced a serious problem. The furniture market demanded constant innovation and design updates to retain customer interest and competitiveness. However, his workshop was limited by the existing equipment, which did not allow for the realization of complex and technologically advanced ideas. The latest trends in furniture design often included creating products using new materials and technologies, such as laser cutting on metal or intricate glasswork, but all this required additional investments in equipment and staff training. "Mike, how am I supposed to do this?" Bob once walked into the boss's office, holding a new blueprint. "I can easily sand the legs from solid oak. I understand this is some sort of vanity table, but what's this mess at the back?" "These are woven elements." "A pattern." "Woven? Also from oak?" "No, Bob, just sigh." Michael dropped his head into his hands. "Find a material suitable for weaving that matches the color. The customer wants a vanity table with a woven background around the mirror. They used to be satisfied with just a carved mirror frame, Mike. This is nonsense. Am I doing basket weaving as a hobby? I'll ask Greg to handle it. At least he has more than 8 fingers." The man raised his left hand, showing an unusual hand. "Darn fireworks, haha." Meanwhile, sales of standard models, which were once popular, began to decline. Customers increasingly sought something new and unusual that other manufacturers couldn't offer. In response to these demands, Michael tried experimenting with what was available, changing color schemes, adding elements of enameled glass, and trying new combinations of textures and materials to give his products a fresh and appealing look. Each new decision required creativity and ingenuity, as financial constraints did not allow him to fully implement all his ideas. For example, using enameled glass allowed him to create striking accents on furniture facades, making each piece look more premium and interesting to clients, just like the volumetric veneer mosaics. But even such small changes required additional costs and time for design and manufacturing. Michael fought every day with the reality that his workshop might not be able to compete with large manufacturers who invested heavily in marketing and new product development. This forced him to seek alternative ways to attract customers and increase sales while maintaining the uniqueness and high quality of his furniture. Michael felt that his business, once bustling with energy and new ideas, had gradually turned into a daily routine. What started as his passion and dream now seemed like a heavy burden, weighed down by everyday difficulties and a lack of innovation. Sales were declining, designs were repeating, and innovative ideas were not being realized due to limited finances and outdated equipment. Each day resembled the previous one, and Michael felt his enthusiasm fading under the weight of accumulated problems. In this atmosphere of stagnation and fatigue from the endless struggle for survival, Michael once decided to take a break and meet a friend to distract himself from his daily worries. They agreed to meet at one of the cozy restaurants with a summer terrace that offered a picturesque view of the city park. The warm summer day was perfect for relaxing outdoors. Sitting at a table, sipping cold drinks, Michael shared his worries and disappointments with his friend. He talked about how difficult it was to maintain the business when each day brought the same tasks without visible progress or growth. How hard it was to find inspiration when you were constrained by financial limitations and unable to implement creative ideas. Michael lamented that the market was saturated, and each new design required more and more effort and investment, which he simply didn't have the funds for. "Yeah, I don't want to upset you, but it seems your old man was right about the manufacturing." Thomas shrugged. "Things aren't going too well for you." Michael sighed wearily, adjusting his hazel-colored hair. Tom was his childhood friend. He never aspired to make big money. He lived for pleasure while his parents ran a pharmaceutical company and funded his entertainment. Everyone was fine with it because, after all, he would inherit a fairly stable business. Though Thomas couldn't offer any real advice on how to get out of the crisis, he could always listen. "I know. I just can't back down now. I've put too much on the line." This conversation was a way for Michael to release his pent-up emotions. We all need a friend who can offer a different perspective or at least listen without judgment. He hoped that a little chat with his friend would help him find a new approach to solving his problems or at least provide some relief from the feeling of loneliness and facing business challenges. That summer day, when Michael and his friend Thomas decided to take a break from their work problems and meet on the terrace of a cozy restaurant, brought unexpected entertainment. The atmosphere was relaxing, and their conversation flowed freely, allowing both to unwind and take a break from their daily routines. They chose a table in a secluded corner of the terrace, which allowed them to enjoy the calm atmosphere and the summer breeze while occasionally sipping cold whiskey. "Catch him. The little rascal, you won't escape now." Suddenly, the idyll was interrupted. From the depths of the restaurant, through the open doors, a boy of about 15 burst out. His sudden appearance made all the guests freeze for a moment, watching the unfolding scene. Following the boy, two waiters ran onto the veranda, clearly trying to catch him, and behind them, with visible irritation on her face, appeared the restaurant's hostess. "Left, he's running left." The staff began chasing between the tables, creating chaos among the diners. Guests had to move and press against the backs of their chairs to avoid colliding with the waiters or the runaway boy. The boy seemed to enjoy the chase, dodging and zigzagging between the tables, leaving a trail of scattered cutlery and half-spilled glasses behind him. This chaos brought a touch of novelty and entertainment to what had been a calm evening. Michael and Thomas, although surprised by the sudden change in atmosphere, couldn't help but laugh at the clumsy attempts of the staff to catch the young troublemaker. The situation resembled some absurd and amusing play in which all the present were involuntarily involved. The situation on the summer terrace of the restaurant escalated dramatically. During his escape, the young man, awkwardly maneuvering between tables and chairs, suddenly tripped and fell right in front of Michael. Instinctively, Michael quickly reacted, grabbing the boy by the shoulder to prevent him from completely falling to the ground. In that moment, he froze, holding the boy and waiting for further action, aware that the scene had caught everyone's attention. "Sir, hold him tighter," shouted a young waitress who had already slipped on spilled drinks on the floor and was wiping her skirt on the go. "Dear guests, please stay in your seats. We have an emergency situation. We will definitely compensate for any inconvenience." The restaurant staff, who had been trying to catch the boy all this time, immediately surrounded them. The waiters and the manager, like crows that had found their prey, crowded around him. Their faces showed a mix of relief and irritation due to all the chaos caused by this young fugitive. Michael felt the tension in the air as he held the boy, feeling his tense muscles and seeing the fear in his eyes. "Damn," cursed the teenager, realizing that this time he wouldn't escape. It felt as if the world had stopped until the waiters and the manager began to act. They quickly discussed among themselves what to do next while other restaurant guests continued to watch the unfolding drama. Michael, holding the boy, tried to understand the reasons for his actions, wondering what could have driven him to cause such a commotion and what would happen next. As the situation calmed down a bit, it became clear that behind the dusty veil of events lay a much bigger drama. The waiters began to share with the restaurant manager details of the boy's previous visits, where he had repeatedly been caught stealing cutlery and leftover food from tables. But this time, his actions were bolder and more decisive. He had broken into the kitchen and then the pantry, which was a serious violation. "Can you imagine? This is what you pay your security for," one of the waiters exclaimed, pulling pieces of salad out of his hair. They just didn't notice a stranger walking right into the kitchen. "Everyone, calm down, now," shouted the manager through the indignant chatter. "We will simply call the police, and they will decide what to do with this boy. I think we should also call Child Protective Services." Judging by his clothes, his family doesn't seem too concerned about his whereabouts. The teenager, now sitting on the floor and pressing his back against the leg of a chair, looked depressed and scared. His clothes were worn out, and his eyes were filled with despair. With each word from the manager threatening to call the police and social services, the fear in the boy's eyes grew more evident. He clearly wasn't one of those teenagers living in comfortable conditions. Michael, still holding the boy by the shoulder, noticed how his eyes began to fill with animalistic terror. It was obvious that the boy was in a desperate situation, and his actions were driven not so much by a desire to cause harm but by sheer necessity. This realization added a layer of tragedy to the situation. "Mike, let them have the boy. Why are you clinging to him?" Thomas quietly said. "It's time to get out of here. We've got nothing to do with this." "Where is the security?" "I mean, we pay for our food, and there are tramps wandering around the kitchen," one of the customers fumed. "Manager." Other patrons and the rest of the restaurant staff gathered around, watching the scene unfold. The atmosphere was tense, with uncertainty hanging in the air about what to do next. Amidst the noise of voices and calls for order, the boy seemed vulnerable and alone, making the whole incident even more excruciating for all witnesses. At the moment when the tension peaked and the manager was about to call the police, Michael unexpectedly intervened. He quickly stood up and, before anyone could react, confidently switched to an act. Michael grabbed the teenager by the ear and began twisting it, as adults sometimes do when trying to teach a lesson on the spot. "Cole! Damn it, is that really you?" he shouted. "We almost went crazy, and here you are begging, disgracing us all." The staff and other guests froze, not understanding what was happening. The situation seemed increasingly absurd to them. But the most shocked of all was Thomas, who had already started finishing his friend's whiskey. "This is my brother, Louis, my younger brother. Mom is in the hospital, still recovering from a minor stroke. We called every hospital and morgue." Michael's face turned red from the blatant lie, which he himself did not expect, but he continued to hold the teenager by the ear. "Did you think you could just run away from home? I'll show you discipline, kid. You will never miss your dad as much because now I'm your guardian." The surroundings grew quiet as the guests and restaurant staff exchanged puzzled glances, trying to discern if it was true or just another fabrication. Michael, utilizing his full acting talent, continued to act as a furious yet concerned big brother, creating an atmosphere of tense drama around him. He glanced at the boy for a moment, as if expecting him to join in the act and support his version of events. The boy's true feelings and thoughts at that moment remained unknown, but his reaction to Michael's words was a mixture of surprise and fear. He clearly hadn't expected such a turn of events, and his gaze was filled with confusion. This development allowed Michael to control the situation for a while, adding elements of unpredictability. The boy, grabbed by the ear by Michael, began to writhe in pain, trying to find a position that would alleviate his suffering. He attempted to hang on Michael's arm, hoping to reduce the pressure on his ear. Michael continued to hold the boy, trying not to cause him any real harm. His face reddened from the tension and the improvised lie, adding credibility to his words and actions. The restaurant staff, observing the scene, couldn't hide their smiles. Their glances, filled with sly amusement and approval, reflected their confidence that the boy would finally receive deserved punishment without the need to call the police. They thought that in such an unusual and fair way, the matter would be resolved on the spot, and the little troublemaker would learn a lesson. "Look at how red he's gotten, Joe," one of the waiters chuckled. "Someone's definitely in for it at home." The atmosphere on the restaurant terrace thickened with anticipation of the next step. Guests, momentarily pausing their dinner, watched the unfolding drama with interest. Some exchanged opinions and comments, sharing guesses about possible outcomes of the scene. Thus, the entire incident turned into a kind of public performance, where each of those present had their role, as an observer, commentator, or, in Michael's case, an actor. When the manager, having gathered her thoughts, approached Michael and the boy, she looked stern and businesslike, adjusting the bow tie on her suit. She approached them to put an end to the chaos. She brought a list of all the tableware, glasses, and cups the boy had managed to lift during his numerous visits to the restaurant. "Here's all the restaurant property your brother managed to steal. As you can see, the boy has stolen items worth the equivalent of an average waiter's monthly salary. She placed the list on the table and looked expectantly at the man. You understand where I'm going with this? We don't need to call the owner, and you don't need problems with child services. Michael, listening to the manager, sighed heavily, realizing the gravity of the moment. Despite his improvised role as a strict brother and the temporary resolution of the tense situation, he understood that the boy's actions required a real solution. With frustration, he pulled out his credit card and handed it to the manager, offering to cover the damage caused by the teenager. After Michael decided to compensate for the damage, it seemed that the unpleasant incident had amicably concluded. The restaurant manager, apparently satisfied with the resolution, calmly thanked the businessman and took his credit card to process the payment. The tension that had gripped everyone for the past few minutes began to subside, and the restaurant gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Everything's fine. Keep a better eye on your brother. It's been a nightmare of a month. Next time, we won't let it slide quietly. Yes, I understand, Michael said with a barely noticeable tremor in his voice, then cleared his throat and continued in a steady tone, he won't trouble you anymore, I promise. The boy, still stunned by everything that had happened, seemed not fully aware of the turn of events. For a moment, as they stepped outside, the boy, as if recovering from fear and sudden calm, felt an urge to bolt. Perhaps fear of unfamiliar men or simply an instinctive desire to avoid any further complications prompted him to flee. However, when the boy sharply turned and tried to run, Michael, anticipating such a move, quickly reacted. Michael's strong hand grabbed him by the shoulder again. The grip was firm and decisive, preventing the boy from breaking free and disappearing into the alley. The businessman, hissing disapprovingly, led the teenager a bit further away, to a quieter part of the street near the restaurant, to talk privately and away from prying eyes. He felt strange. There was something in the boy's gaze that simply wouldn't let him drop everything and go home. So, having staged this embarrassingly loud scene in the restaurant, he was determined, at the very least, to find out why an almost grown boy was stealing from a restaurant. Why do you do it? Where are your parents? And don't you think you should be grateful that I just saved you from big trouble? His voice was stern but caring, as he genuinely wanted to help the boy. Go to hell, the teenager grumbled rudely, unwilling to engage. Hey, kid, be more polite. He just pulled you out of such a mess. Show some respect, seriously. The boy resisted for a long time, unwilling to share personal information. He turned away from Michael, clearly indicating that there would be no dialogue between them. However, after several minutes of tense questioning, the pressure of the situation and the realization that he could have been in even bigger trouble forced him to relent. I'm not a vagrant. I already figured that out. You're too bold and clean for a vagrant. The man let go of the boy and crossed his arms over his chest. Mom drinks. She brings men over. It's impossible to live there. It's easier to wander the streets. Thomas sighed heavily and leaned his back against the wall. If his friend enjoyed playing the educator, Thomas would rather be at home right now. He had seen too many stories where an adult trying to help a troubled teenager ended up behind bars. But Mike had no intention of leaving, and abandoning his friend would be utterly disgraceful. Maybe there are more details? So far, it doesn't sound very convincing. The boy sighed deeply, already realizing that this oddball wouldn't leave him alone easily. Well, we live in a rundown apartment. It's more like a drug den, which it essentially is. As a kid, it was calmer. I just went out to play, and it was fine. But then there was more schoolwork, so I couldn't go out as much. And at home, there were all these guys who didn't like me at all. Either my hairstyle was wrong, or my look was displeased. In general, a couple of times it almost came to blows, and my mom didn't care at all. Every one of those guys was her great love. Then there were her friends. The boy shuddered, recalling some very unpleasant scenes, but they liked me too much. It makes me want to puke. They were constantly trying to get into my room. Horrible women. His home was far from what many would call a cozy or safe place to live. It was indeed a drug den where his mother spent time hosting noisy parties with a variety of guests who often came and went. These parties were full of alcohol and, to be honest, other substances, creating a chaotic and unpredictable atmosphere at home. As a child, the teenager somehow managed to avoid conflicts or clashes with his mother's visitors by learning to stay unnoticed or hiding when necessary. However, as he grew older, it became increasingly difficult to ignore or evade the problems that arose. Over the years, he became more noticeable, and his presence began to irritate or cause conflicts with the men who visited their home. "Hey, Jesse, who's this pup?" a completely drunk man slurred, gripping the doorframe. "What are you looking at, kid? Don't like something? Let's go outside, and I'll quickly explain who's who." "That's my son, Eddie." "Bert, leave him alone. Let's go to the bedroom instead." A woman appeared behind him, her age impossible to guess as her facial features had become so blurred. He felt that his home had become a place full of tension and uncertainty rather than a refuge. Looking at his mother, he felt only hatred and disgust, especially when he caught her at inappropriate moments. Desperation drove him to find ways to survive and support himself, ultimately leading him to steal from restaurants. It was his way of finding some food or a little money from selling utensils to make life in that toxic environment a bit easier. Mike found it hard to listen to these revelations. Seeing a young person forced to face such life challenges and solve adult problems at such a tender age was unbearable. The difficulties the teenager faced at home were far more serious than anyone could have imagined. The boy's story about daily conflicts with ever-changing unknown drunks added weight to their conversation. These men, invited by his mother, often posed a threat to the young man, making his life a continuous nightmare. Even more troubling to the businessman was the situation with his mother's friends. These women, who also frequently visited their home for parties, didn't even realize how much they were humiliating the poor teenager, who was not mentally prepared for such advances. "Why are you so hung up on him? Sure, drunken men are scary. But why the issue with women?" Thomas forced out his signature smile, always appearing a second before a silly joke, experienced. "Now imagine some drunken woman shoving her face into yours, reeking of tobacco and a week-old hangover. And her face is all scratched up from constant falls and fights with drinking buddies, with sagging skin and a beer belly." Michael snapped back sharply with a touch of anger, turning to his friend. "Do you like that? Okay, fine, I'll shut up." Gradually opening up to Michael, the teenager continued to share details of his daily life, filled not only with challenges but also efforts to maintain some normalcy amid the chaos. He explained that despite all the difficulties, he tried to behave like an ordinary schoolboy. The boy made significant efforts to keep up with his studies and personal hygiene, which was not easy in his situation. "I try to go to school. It doesn't go well, but at least I try. I do my homework in the library, keep my things at friends' places. I eat irregularly, but sometimes friends feed me. Most often, I just steal and sell things to junk dealers. They definitely won't wonder where I got engraved goblets. With that money, I take my clothes to the laundromat, buy food, pay for transportation." The boy wiped his nose with the sleeve of his worn dark gray hoodie. His brown eyes were full of fatigue, but there was something bright in them that immediately caught Michael's attention. These everyday efforts showed his determination not only to survive in difficult conditions, but also to build some semblance of a future. At least, he tried to get an education. He tried to resist circumstances that could easily make someone else give up. Seeing all this, Michael realized that his initial perception of the situation was incomplete, and he began to see before him not just a problem child, but a young man fighting for his future. The man took out a pack of cigarettes from the breast pocket of his jacket. "Why stealing?" "Mom took my documents. We had a big fight that day. You can't officially work without documents, and unofficially. I tried a couple of times." The boy nervously shrugged his shoulders. "I did the job, came for the money, and they just pointed to the door. Said they didn't know me, hadn't promised any money. What can you prove? I tried it a couple of times and gave up. Stealing is easier." This experience made him more cautious and skeptical of people, especially when it came to money and promises. The teenager concluded that trusting had become much harder, and unofficial ways of earning, like petty theft, though risky, seemed to him a more reliable way to survive. Listening to the teenager's story about his struggle for survival, Michael and his friend couldn't hide their surprise and sympathy. They whistled, expressing their amazement at how difficult life is for many young people in the modern world. They had pulled the boy out of the restaurant, where he was stealing to live a normal life. It was a cruel irony. Reflecting on the boy's difficult situation, Michael felt he couldn't just walk away and forget about him after their conversation. He decided he could offer a few more services. However, when he expressed his desire to help, the teenager asked him a perfectly logical question. "Mister, why do you want to help me?" Momentarily puzzled by this question, Michael shrugged. Thomas, standing behind him, was already just looking at his shoes. He didn't even try to think about his friend's motives. But, in a way, he was glad that Mike was distracted from his business worries. "I don't know myself. I just can help you, so why not?" He took 2 steps towards the teenager and patted him on the shoulder. "Would it make you feel worse? Come on, cheer up." Perhaps he was indeed trying to distract himself from his own problems by solving someone else's. Another reason might have been his first impression of the boy. Despite all the difficulties, the boy genuinely tried to live like a normal person. Michael saw potential in him not only to survive, but also to contribute significantly to society. If, of course, he received a little help. Something told him that troubled teens from such families always lacked simple support. Such kids were set for a fight from the start. "And there's something about you, like a gladiator," Mike smiled foolishly, seeing the boy's bewilderment. "I mean, you haven't given up yet, which means you're determined to keep fighting. For the right to exist, for education, for a job. Many guys in your situation would just follow in their parents' footsteps. But you're still struggling." According to Michael, the boy's story, speech, and gaze indicated that he was not a lost cause. This convinced Michael that helping the boy was not only a matter of compassion, but also an investment in the future of society, where young people like this teenager could become full and useful members. After Michael decided to help the boy, they came to a decision about his temporary move to the workshop. This decision seemed practical. Michael's workshop, equipped with everything necessary for furniture production, also had a small room with a bed that had yet to find an owner. The craftsmen loved to nap there during shifts. Well, they would find another place to rest. At least the poor kid would finally sleep in warmth and safety. However, it wasn't all that simple. The first month of living and working together was challenging for both. The teenager, living in constant uncertainty and distrust, couldn't fully shake off his fears and doubts. He still feared that there might be a catch in his new life, or that Michael's promises would turn out to be another lie. And sometimes these fears resulted in unpleasant situations. Mike, it happened again." Old Morley entered the office, looking rather unfriendly. "He did it again. Why does the kid need that wretched chisel?" Michael frowned. The second case in a week, but he didn't want to openly admit that Eddie had stolen something again. He adjusted his tie and took a sip of his now cold coffee. In the silence, the mug clinked against the solid oak desk. "Morley, are you sure he stole the chisel? Maybe you put it somewhere and forgot." "No, Mike, I always put tools in their places. You know we don't take things from each other. I go to the drawer, look for the chisel, and it's just not there. Understand? It's gone." Morley waved his hands. "Our patience is running out. We don't need such a helper if he creates problems himself. Work slows down when we have to search for our tools." The businessman sighed heavily. He ran his hand through his hair and fell silent. He understood it was all wrong. He wished the boy well, but ended up causing trouble for his employees. It was hard for him to contain his frustration and disappointment when he found tools missing or noticed other minor infractions by Eddie. He had to remind himself of the boy's harsh upbringing and the reasons he decided to help him. Nevertheless, despite all the difficulties, both tried to find common ground. Michael continued to include the boy in the work, gradually teaching him the basics of furniture making, while the teenager, despite his fears and distrust, tried to adapt to the new life and the opportunities it offered. "Eddie, you understand that what you're doing is wrong?" The teenager sullenly remained silent. He always looked like a frightened fawn when Michael started such conversations. Eddie pulled his hood over his head and exhaled loudly. Mike stayed in his place, hinting that he wasn't going to leave. "Yes, sir. I understand," Eddie replied reluctantly. "I don't know why I do it." "And the things return eventually, right?" "Right," the man answered, sitting down next to his protege on a pile of boards, "but the work doesn't go faster because of this. The guys get angry, nervous, look for their tools, and end up distracted from orders. Do you understand?" The guy silently nodded his head. He understood everything perfectly. Even he couldn't explain to himself why he kept stealing. Maybe he was afraid that Michael would deceive him, and he would have to fend for himself again. Or was he just acting out of habit? It was hard to understand. But the guy knew for sure that he was ashamed. He had been given a place in the workshop, a roof over his head, and even paid for small errands. He could calmly do his homework in his small room and attend school more frequently. This man, Michael, had given him a ticket to life. He couldn't disappoint him like that. People show gratitude in a different way. It won't happen again. I promise. Over time, the situation in Michael's workshop began to stabilize, and the atmosphere gradually improved. The teenager, after living in the new environment for some time, started to get used to the order and the people around him. His initial distrust and tension were replaced by a more open and friendly attitude towards those around him. He became more sociable and even made friends with several of the craftsmen. These new acquaintances helped him adapt better and feel part of society again. The craftsmen enthusiastically shared their experience and knowledge with him, seeing his interest and willingness to learn. Additionally, the cleaning lady at the workshop, noticing how hard it was for the young man, started bringing him homemade cookies, which also added to his comfort and sense of home. Soledad was a very kind woman. She wasn't even 30 yet, but life was tough for her too. She had literally been left alone. They wanted her to marry a man she had never seen before. Some fathers' businessmen provide their offspring with everything necessary, while others try to gain as much power as possible by giving their daughters away to strangers. For refusing to marry, her family quickly branded her a traitor. So, she ended up on the street, a graduate student with nothing but a bag of clothes and documents. And then her and Eddie's story became intertwined by Michael's kindness. If it weren't for him, Soledad would have had a very hard time. Working at the workshop was pleasant, the job was close to the dormitory, the men often offered a helping hand, the boss was kind, and now she even had a companion. "Eddie, come here, kid." "Stop it," the boy grumbled, "I'm already 15, I'm not a kid." The woman ruffled the boy's light brown hair. She smiled mischievously and hugged the teenager. "Don't be grumpy, Eddie. I brought cookies." Soledad handed her friend a box, this time with ginger. "Yes, I know, it's not Christmas, but why not? Have a snack, and then we'll clean up the sawdust after the guys." The boy smiled back at her. In such moments, he completely forgot about his old life. The thefts of tools and other items that had previously worried Michael stopped. The teenager began to feel more safe and confident, and his need to steal as a way of survival vanished. Michael felt satisfied that his decision to help the boy had led to such positive changes. He saw that his intervention in the young man's fate was starting to bear real fruit, which made him even more confident in the correctness of his choice. However, Michael's trials were not over yet. "Damn it, Greg, where have you been?" "I'm busy. Just give me 5 minutes, okay?" There was unusual noise in the workshop. The craftsmen were running from corner to corner, and Soledad was tasked with bringing the place to perfect order. Even Eddie was involved. However, the boy didn't quite understand the fuss. The situation was quite tense for Michael. The upcoming meeting with an important client was a critical point for him, as it could be the last chance for his workshop to stay afloat. The client was a wealthy and influential man, and his choice could significantly affect not only the workshop's reputation but also its financial condition. His wife, known for her fastidiousness and particular taste in interior design, expected furniture of the highest quality and exclusive design. This imposed especially high demands on Michael and his team. They had to present products that would satisfy the desires and needs of such demanding clients. Michael and his team worked tirelessly, preparing for the meeting. They carefully selected materials, revised designs, and spent additional hours refining every detail to ensure everything was flawless. The entire workshop was mobilized to achieve one goal: to impress the client and his wife. The success of this meeting could significantly change the future of his business, providing the necessary financial boost and potentially opening new horizons for the company's development. It was crucial to confirm the viability of his enterprise as one of the few furniture manufacturers in the city capable of meeting high standards in design and quality. If the client and his wife liked his work on the kitchen set, it could lead to an additional order to fully furnish their house, a task that could bring the workshop incredible success. On the eve of the important meeting with potential clients, Michael felt increasing tension. Fear and adrenaline caused a slight nausea in his throat. The description of the order he received from the couple was extremely abstract, leaving much room for creativity, which in this situation seemed less of an advantage and more of an additional problem. How? What? Mike, I don't understand what to do with this. Quiet, Morley, I'm thinking. The requirements for the kitchen set were stated in terms that could be interpreted in various ways, and Michael reread them over and over, trying to understand how to translate these descriptions into a specific design that would satisfy the client's discerning wife. Each time he imagined certain parts of the description, the resulting image was shattered by the next detail. Ornament in an oriental style. Light tones. Bright design. Calm shades. Solid wood. Many shelves, spacious. Not a corner set, straight. This is just a list of antonyms, document. I don't think a lady with a $4,000 handbag will ask us to make a kitchen from children's drawings. How did it come about that you couldn't make the blueprint? Well, Mr. Lewis is a very busy man, so we had to communicate with his wife. And Mrs. Lewis openly stated that she only has wishes, but no overall picture. Smile and wave, boys. Smile and wave. A teenager, being in Michael's workshop, tried to be as inconspicuous as possible and not interfere with the work of experienced craftsmen and the owner himself. When there was no need for cleaning or other minor chores, he spent time in the storage room where unnecessary or leftover materials were kept: boards, scraps, pieces of wood. These materials seemed useless to everyone, but to the boy, they represented an endless source of creativity. Sometimes he rummaged through a box of waste paper, where old blueprints and sketches that were no longer used were stored. The teenager studied them with interest, trying to understand the logic and craftsmanship behind each project, and sometimes even attempted to recreate some of them on his own. It was his way of learning and having fun, testing his skills in furniture making. Occasionally, the craftsman would even pick up some ideas for real orders, which immensely flattered Eddie. 3 days before Michael's important meeting with a client, the description text of the kitchen set order, which was to be the culmination of the workshop's work, accidentally ended up in the waste paper box. The description stated that the client appreciated foreign designs, preferred light wood, and wanted to see a combination of minimalism and brightness in their kitchen, a formulation that seemed both strange and amusing to the boy. What kind of nonsense is this? And did someone actually fulfill this? However, this random find sparked his creativity. Despite his youth and limited experience, he decided to try to create something based on this description. It was his chance not just to copy something old, but to attempt to create something entirely new and unique, even without access to the main resources of the workshop and using only what had been discarded as unnecessary. Outside the storage room, in the corner of the workshop where unfinished projects were usually stored, the teenager found a kitchen nook that immediately caught his attention. The structure seemed grotesque and unusual in its design. It was one of those experimental projects that the craftsman sometimes assembled from leftover materials to test ideas or concepts. The cabinets from this installation were lying in the storage room as if discarded, and the boy decided it was just a draft that still needed to be refined or dismantled. Knowing that such projects were often left unfinished over the weekends when the craftsmen went home and were completed only upon their return on working days, the youth thought he could help by disassembling this unattractive kitchen nook. However, instead of simply disassembling it, he decided to unleash his imagination and play with the design. After all, he had a strange order description, and here was clearly a draft, but already assembled work. He began rearranging the cabinets, changing their placement, adding bright accents from the remaining scraps and decorative elements he found in the storage room. He immersed himself in the creative process, exploring different combinations and options. He knew he had only a few days before the craftsman and Michael returned, who might be disconcerted by his sudden creative impulse. So, he decided to use this time as effectively as possible. He found containers of ceramic mosaic, which had once been written off and intended for disposal. The mosaic of different colors and shapes, though not used in current projects, was the perfect material for adding brightness. He also found several whiteboards that could serve as the much-desired shelves for the client and black iron legs from an old table that could add a touch of minimalism and modern design. For 2 whole days, the teenager immersed himself in the creative process, carefully combining the mosaic elements, forming a base for the kitchen nook from the boards, and adapting the iron legs for the table. He experimented with various layouts, trying to find the perfect combination of minimalism and brightness that could appeal to discerning clients. Each step was dictated by his intuition and vision of what could look and function best. The greatest pleasure he derived was from assembling the mosaic into an extensive ornament. This activity captivated him so much that he even forgot to eat. Monday marked the visit of an important delegation to Michael's workshop, which immediately attracted the attention of all the employees. The group included Michael himself, 2 unknown individuals, and the leading craftsman of the workshop. They all looked serious and businesslike, discussing some details on the go. "Your order, to be honest, almost stumped us, Mrs. Lewis," Michael chirped with a silly smile. "We are used to working with blueprints that we send to the client before starting the work. But we are not interested in looking at some gray drawings," the woman interrupted him. "I want to see the real volume. I want to see how the light falls on the set. Do you understand? I need visibility." The craftsmen exchanged glances with their boss, but they all decided to keep silent. The rich have their quirks. Eddie was covering for Soledad that day, who was taking exams. Holding a broom in his hands, he couldn't resist his curiosity. Something in the air felt special, and, inspired by his recent creative impulse, he decided to follow the group to find out what would happen next. As they approached the room where his draft had been earlier, the boy's heart began to beat faster. It can't be. Did I ruin the order? When they entered the room, the boy realized that his hands had independently reworked the project that Michael planned to present to the clients. He had transformed the unfinished kitchen corner into something new that, in his eyes, looked much better and more interesting. But now he understood that he might have inadvertently created a problem by interfering with the official project. What had started as an innocent exercise in creativity suddenly took on an unprecedented scale. The boy froze, watching for a reaction. When the door to the room gently opened, Michael was the first to step inside and paused for a moment as if struck by a wave of surprise. His face, initially filled with expectation and hope, gradually began to redden, starting from the ears and slowly spreading to his neck. His hand started to tremble with excitement and perhaps anger. Before his eyes was a scenario he clearly had not anticipated. "Is this our draft?" "We didn't move it anywhere, Doc," Morley whispered in the boss's ear. "I don't know what this is. We left the draft and went for the weekend. No one touched anything, I swear." What he saw was far from the model that his craftsman had been meticulously designing in recent days. Before him stood something entirely different, the result of the boy's unplanned creative will. It was evident that the model had undergone radical changes. White shells adorned a backdrop covered with mosaic in an oriental style, assembled from muted tones, giving it an exotic and refined look. A polished deep brown countertop paired with black matte metal legs created an impression of strictness and elegance. The cabinet doors were also done in white, complementing the overall composition. The craftsman also stopped, trying to understand how this could have happened. The air was thick with tension. The client's reactions would determine how events would unfold, as the presented piece could either strengthen or seriously undermine trust in his workshop. While Michael was still trying to comprehend what he saw and bracing for the worst, the situation took an unexpected turn. In the heavy silence, applause suddenly broke out. Unexpectedly, a woman, shining with pleasure and delight, began clapping, jumping up and down like a little girl. Her reaction was so bright and emotional that it instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. "Wonderful! This is just wonderful, dear. They did such a great job." She quickly passed by Michael, barely noticing his confusion, and approached the kitchen corner. With curiosity and admiration, she ran her hands over the mosaic surface, which seemed to especially catch her attention. "This looks very much like Moroccan zellige, and what colors? Pastel shades. Why didn't I think of it myself?" Mrs. Lewis exclaimed enthusiastically. "Exactly, if it were bright terracotta, it would look tacky and too colorful. But this caramel color fits right in." "Hey, Ernie, what's zellige?" Greg nudged the craftsman standing next to him. "I have no idea. This isn't even our project, just smile and wave, Greg." Michael, standing aside, suddenly realized that his fears were unfounded. Instead of criticism and discontent, he faced complete approval and delight from the client's wife, whose opinion, as expected, was decisive in this deal. His shock slowly turned into relief and a growing sense of pride in the unexpected success. His head was spinning, and he found it hard to breathe. Michael, stunned and puzzled by the client's reaction, quickly excused himself and left the room to catch his breath and gather his thoughts. In the hallway, the teenager was already waiting for him, standing nearby, unsure of what to do. He saw Michael leave the room, still red from excitement, and braced for the worst. "Sir, I didn't mean to. I just didn't know it was a project for a client." The boy's voice trembled strongly, and he clutched the mop. "I heard you were supposed to have an important presentation, but I just didn't know what exactly you would be showing. You see, I saw the cabinets in the warehouse and thought the whole project was scrapped. I'm sorry." Michael approached the boy, and tension was also evident in his eyes. The boy held his breath, expecting shouting and scolding. However, instead, Michael suddenly hugged him. This gesture was so unexpected that the boy froze for a moment in surprise. "Thank you, son." Following the waves of emotion, Michael quickly returned to the room with his clients, leaving the boy in the hallway, filled with a new sense of pride and surprise at his actions. From the open door came the voice of the enthusiastic woman, who now wanted to see the same design not only in the kitchen but also in other parts of her home. Her enthusiasm and desire to extend the new style were so infectious that the entire workshop team felt a surge of energy and inspiration. Several years after that fateful day, when the boy inadvertently became the savior of the furniture workshop, his life took a new turn. Having finished school, Eddie did not feel worried about his future. Yes, he did poorly on his exams, but can anyone blame him? He had lived in real hell for so many years, just graduating was already an achievement. But Eddie's future was not entirely in his own hands. Michael, the businessman whose company was saved by the unexpected creative surge of the young man, took on the responsibility of paying for his education. It was the least he could do to thank him for the miracle the boy had performed, revolutionizing design and saving the business from collapse. "You know, maybe now I'll consciously pursue design," the boy smiled, winking playfully at his patron. "It's kind of weird being a designer without understanding the rules." The man approached the boy and hugged him. The day when the workshop's life was saved was still fresh in his memory. "I don't care, Eddie. You've always amazed us with your ideas, son. Whether you have an education or not, It doesn't matter. Mike stepped back from Eddie and looked at him. But if you get a diploma, you'll have a ticket to life. As if without a diploma, you'd kick me out of the workshop, huh? He grinned cheekily and then laughed. Honestly, I'm just curious. You know, to look at the issue from the inside, to study the rules and logic. The heartfelt conversation between the two men was interrupted by the appearance of a young woman. She was dressed elegantly. No one would have thought that only the size of her salary kept the plain-looking cleaner from transforming into a true beauty. Eddie, baby, I can't believe how grown-up you've become, Soledad said, embracing the young man tenderly and fusing the gesture with genuine maternal love. I believe in you, you'll succeed. You're a talented boy. The young man, now almost an adult, looked to the future with faith in his success. His new path in design promised to be bright, as he now had the opportunity to develop his skills in a professional environment. Moreover, he had people who believed in his talent and abilities. Michael, on his part, didn't particularly care whether the young man created masterpieces consciously or as a result of random inspiration. He cherished every opportunity to see the boy grow and develop as a professional. In the eyes of the boy who was once angry at the world, he saw a desire to create beauty, reminding him of that important day when the decision to give a chance to the kid from the streets not only saved his business but also had an unexpectedly positive impact on his own life. After successfully completing an interior design project that finally solidified the workshop's financial standing, Michael took another bold step to change the boy's life not only professionally but also personally. The situation with his alcoholic mother had long needed a resolution, and now, with the necessary resources, Michael easily managed to win parental rights from her, marking the first step towards creating a better future for the boy. However, a more challenging task was obtaining guardianship rights for himself, as there were prejudices in society and the law against single men wanting to take on the role of guardian. At this moment, Soledad came to the rescue. Learning about the difficulties Michael faced, she proposed an extravagant solution: to get married to simplify the adoption process. Initially, both saw this step as a temporary measure, but over time, as they spent more time together, genuine feelings began to develop between them. And thoughts of divorce were forgotten. Meanwhile, the young man, now a full-fledged member of the newly formed family, couldn't help but marvel at how unexpectedly his life had unfolded. From the moment he committed theft in a restaurant, his life had radically changed. Now he had not only a new family but also a promising future in the world of design. Each new day brought him the realization that sometimes coincidences can lead to remarkably wonderful changes. He smiled, recalling his long journey, and warmly thought about how the strange twists of fate had led him to a new life full of love and opportunities.